Hit it.
Let's get into it. 1, 2, 3.
Hello and welcome to tonight's episode of My Whiskey Den. Tonight we are lucky enough to have Alan Bishop, the head distiller, and Jolee, the marketing director for Spirits of French Lick, which is in West Baden, Indiana. Am I correct in that?
Yes.
Yep. So just down the road. You're really close anyways. It's not too far off from where that is. But we're, like I said, we're totally excited to have you. We've tried two of the spirits that you guys had, the Wheater and the Lee Sinclair. And totally impressed by what you guys did with the time frame that stuff came out in, and your whole kind of backstory you guys have with it. But before we get going, we want to thank some of the people in the chat for stopping in. Oscar, Icehouse, Nathan Clark. It's always good to see you. AJ from down in Texas. Thanks for stopping in. Barrel Strength Gentleman, never seen you, so thanks for coming in at this point too. What are all you guys in the chat drinking? And better yet, what are you guys? Oh, that's you. Hey, even better. What are you guys drinking right now?
Go ahead.
I'm having coffee, to be honest with you. My liver hates me at this point. I'm detoxing by retoxing with caffeine and nicotine. So
sprinkle in some hate and you're good, man.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. I'm drinking Lee Sinclair. I figured it was only appropriate.
It is. Your bottle's a little bit fuller
There
than
you go.
mine
That
right
is
now.
a well-loved bottle.
It is.
I love to see that.
It's scarily near the bottom.
This was open yesterday.
That's a nice dent. I'll give you that.
Yeah.
That's a nice dent
Pretty
for
good.
a day.
It's respectable.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I've got the Wheater poured, and I've got the last of my Lee Sinclair.
Nice.
And
Good selections.
Good selections.
I hear that distillery's up to some stuff.
Yeah.
Doing some stuff.
That's very true.
A few things.
Yeah.
And Oscar in the chat's got me a little jealous. He's got some Glengoyne legacy. He knows how much I'm a little fan of that.
Yeah.
But basically their whole lineup I'm a big fan of, so I'm not going to complain about seeing any of that stuff.
I'm a huge Glengoyne fan, and that's one that a lot of Scotch people don't talk about, but it's a great one. It's
ridiculously underrated. When you hear everyone talking about Macallan, I'm like, I won't even have a choice with picking that over that any day of the week.
Exactly.
Question for both of you. What spirit, wine, beer, whiskey, whatever it was, got you excited about, I don't want to say drinking in general, but kind of got you excited about kind of the industry that you're involved in? Like, what was the first one that kicked it off for you?
Ooh, that's a good one. Shit. Probably. Well, I broke the rule. My bad. Probably.
Didn't you? Not even 5 minutes. We had
It's
to
all
talk about
downhill
this.
from here. God.
It's a bad thing. I'm not even drinking. Probably. Obviously, moonshine for me. Probably, given my background, was probably the first thing I ever drank and remember actually liking or learning to like in some way, shape, or form. But I think after that, it would probably have to be once I started trying to get into the legal industry and actually getting my hands on some Armagnacs and some Calvados.
Ooh.
Calvados really was probably the one that set off in my head, oh, you can do some really interesting things. If you break the proposed rules a little bit, so.
Yeah, I used to work at a microbrew in California, and it's called Wolf Creek Brewing Company. And they were the first ones to teach me about drinking, really. I came on board, I think, with them in my early 20s. And so they taught me about wine. We had a wine rep that would come in, and they'd always teach us about what kind of wines they had, and then all of the beers as well. And so they were always very... and probably still are, they educate their staff about what goes into making the products, and how to sell it. And so a extra special bitters beer, an ESB, that Rob McFerrin made, was the first thing that I really drank that kind of blew my mind. It just really was like, holy shit, like, you can do this?
You waited to after 5 minutes. We'll give you credit on that.
Thank you. And then it was just some dry red wines that they had exposed me to that they taught me how to drink. And so I didn't really start drinking bourbon until I came to Spirits of French Lick and started learning from Alan. So
that's cool. And that's fair. It's we're always interested in kind of what kicks off the whole kind of excitement for you and kind of going down the road. And Ben, isn't the Calvados, isn't that what you're using in a barrel age experiment right now?
And that's what I'm drinking right now. I just pulled a sample from the barrel, and it's coming along really nice. So I'm aging some VS Calvados in a little mini barrel that previously I'd aged some bourbon in, and then I'm going to refill it with Ardbeg is the plan. But
nice.
Right now the Calvados is just coming along beautifully. So
yeah, I love a very well made Calvados, and I love the farm distilling stuff that goes into Calvados. Any of those folk distilling things, really, that's kind of what gets me excited and makes me rewire my brain sometimes and rethink how we do production, and try how to implement some of those things into what we do at Spirits of French Lick. So,
what was that bourbon that we sampled at Midwest Distillers Fest that I can never remember the name of it? We had drank a Pappy 23, and then we drank a 25-year-old Rittenhouse. That changed the game for me. I mean, I have had a lot of bourbons, but this year I drank that bourbon and I was like, oh, this is what it's about. Like, it was life-changing, and it was just like this much.
Rittenhouse is actually a rye, but close enough. I mean,
Yeah, but I was gonna say we all talk about that moment.
Pointing that out on a live.
It's a whiskey. It's a whiskey.
Appreciate that, buddy.
If I didn't, they're doing a live, and this is going through YouTube. There are people who are going to destroy you in the comments. So technically, I'm taking the heat for them in order to set you back on the right track. Because that's what
a whiskey. We drank it alongside it. I didn't see the bottle. It was in a tiny little sample bottle that said RH25. I don't know what I drank. All I know was that it was fucking delicious. So
we all talk about the eye flutter one. You're past the 5 minutes. No more strikes. You can do what you want now. We're good.
Are you also aware?
We were there anyway.
Are you also aware that when you get angry, Red, that like your actual camera screen steams up?
No, that's good. We always like the whiskey, like we talk about, that gives you kind of like that eye flutter where you kind of fade off into your own world for a second. People ask you what happened, you're like, shut up. Leave me alone for a second.
Yeah. This is a holy experience, and you are not currently part of it.
It really was.
And Alan and Jolee, it doesn't sound like you have too much, but Alan, what's your whiskey kind of background? Like, what did you do before you came to Spirits of French Lick?
So my distilling background basically starts when I was a kid. Like, my family's been involved in distilling, both legal and illicit, for multiple generations. Indiana and Kentucky both. I got kind of more involved in it when I was about 15. My dad and my grandpa basically they basically helped me build a still, and they gave me 2 rules: don't blow your ass up in the backyard and bring us something that's worth drinking. But they wouldn't teach me how to do anything. They refused to teach me how to do anything, which I think has actually been a great asset, because it's all been autodidactic. It's all been self-learned. So I didn't have anybody tell me not to try something because it wouldn't work, and that's been a good thing. I know a million ways to make really bad whiskey and a couple ways to make good whiskey. So I grew up on a tobacco farm. We converted that to an organic produce farm when I was in my 20s. I did the organic produce thing for a while, but really that was just an excuse to breed new open pollinated varieties for organic agriculture. And let me be the first to tell you that in southern Indiana at that point in time, nobody gave a shit about any of that, because everybody had their own garden and they could care less about organic. We're just going to go to the store and buy some 7 Dust and just drown this cabbage in 7 Dust. Anyways, so by the time I was about 25, I'd bred several open pollinated corns. I couldn't even get the Amish to grow them. And so I started thinking, all right, distilling is agricultural. Let's step back into this distilling thing, take it a little bit more seriously, think it through, and see what we can do with some of these cool different varieties that we have and run them through the pot still. By the time I was about 28, I had a 150-gallon pot still in my backyard, and a girlfriend, now wife, who was about done putting up with that shit and told me to get a job doing this legally. And so I started putting in resumes to every new distillery that was opening in Louisville, Kentucky, until finally Copper and Kings took pity on me, I think. Either that or I was the cheapest person they could get. That was probably the case. I worked there for 2 years, was in charge of really the apple brandy and the Absinthe program. And no offense to those guys, but I couldn't get out of there fast enough and get back over to what I call the right side of the river. I love Kentucky, and my blood's from Kentucky, but I want to get back into Hoosier-occupied northern Kentucky and play into the distilling history that I knew about that was on this side of the river, because nobody was really doing that. And nobody was really talking about it at the time. And really, I think even now with all the distilleries we have in the state of Indiana, there's very few of them that are really talking about it in a legitimate way.
That's true. And how did you end up at Spirits of French Lick, Jolee?
So it was, well, my husband is the front of the house general manager. We were managing at a local sports bar and restaurant here in Jasper, Indiana. And they came to him. The owners were friends with the winemaker, Nick Doty, and his wife, Laurelyn Doty. And so they came to Andy and asked him if he would be willing to be the general manager of their front of the house. And he had been there almost a year when the marketing director moved to Oregon. And my husband was like, are you interested in this? And I was like, nope. And then about 3 or 4 months later, he just kept saying, I really think you'd be good at this. I really think you'd be good at this. So I interviewed with Nick's mom, and I think there were like maybe 3 or 4 other people that were interviewing as well. And I stood out among the rest. And so here we are.
Nice. That's awesome.
Just to juxtapose that, let me also add to my part of the story, so this doesn't become all about the Jolee show.
Right? I don't make anything. I should just put that out there. I don't make a mash bill. I don't tell Alan what to do. I don't handle Alan. We've heard that before. There is none of that. Alan says, Jolee, ride the gazelle. This is what we're doing today. And I'm like, all right.
Right. Yeah, it's true.
That's how it works.
I looked into my side of it. I'm not going to lie. Mine was I had one foot out the door at Copper and Kings, and I was leaving one way or the other. And I just happened to get the call from the owners. They had heard my name through 2 other distillers, and finally somehow got a hold of me. And they're like, "You interested in this job?" And I was trying to play it all cool and calm and collected. And I was like, "Yeah, I don't know." But like on the inside, I was like, "Fuck this place. I'm out of here tomorrow if I get the chance. Doesn't matter if they pay me half as much at Copper and Kings. I'm going."
What year was it? 2016 when they actually started the distillery side of things there? Yeah. So,
April 2016.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing for what you guys have all kind of accomplished in the lineup you guys have in the short time period, as far as what I'm seeing, because that's pretty impressive. Oh, excuse me.
So I got a question for you, Jolie. So if you were going to market a whiskey for Larry Bird, what would you do?
She's going to move her glasses again. That's what she's going to
do. You got to start off with this, Jolie. You got to start off with, if I were going to market a whiskey for Larry Bird, the first thing I would tell Larry Bird is it's not his name that's going to be on it. I'd be like, you got other famous basketball friends that we can exploit that people still know who they are nowadays,
right? Oh my God!
Is he gonna name it after Magic Johnson?
Did you guys ever watch? Have you guys ever seen the Kroll Show? The Kroll Show does a great Larry Bird skit, and so I would probably start with that that. That's good. You know what? I was a stat girl in high school for our varsity basketball team, and that's as far as I go into basketball. I don't really follow sports a whole lot, and so I don't know. He's pretty pasty, and I'm good with that because I'm pretty pasty. So maybe we could bond over our paleness. I really don't, I don't know. Does he even drink alcohol? I don't know.
I have no idea.
I need to be inspired, and I'm just not inspired by Larry Bird.
He drinks a lot of Lee Sinclair. I know because I've hung out with him and the Johnny Coog up at the lake house.
So many times.
And we drank a lot of Lee Sinclair. I'm just saying. I mean, it didn't even exist, but really, Lee Sinclair probably inspired Little Pink Houses. Just saying.
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah.
We're steering away from Larry Bird. We'll leave it.
Please.
For a bit. Were there any releases from Spirits of French Lick, like wine-wise or anything, that got you excited about going there, or was it just the opportunity to go there and start something new of like your own making?
So I had been drinking French Lick Chambourcin that they grow those grapes at their vineyard in Martin County. And I had been drinking that wine. It's a dry red wine for years. I was actually consulted when I was working at a graphic design sign shop when they were coming out with their new sweet wine lineup labels. And so, like I said, I was friends with the son, and so he brought all of those labels to me and asked me to consult on their cocoa label design. And so that was kind of fun having, come to it afterwards. But yeah, it was the opportunity really beyond anything. And I didn't know anything at all. And when I met Alan, I told him that. I said, I'm going to be so far up your ass every single day, asking questions like, what is this? What are we doing? What is that? And it's still the case because there's a lot that I don't know. And I do ask a shit ton of questions. And Alan is very kind and answers all of them. He did not like me in the beginning, so you should talk to him about that. But yeah, I just try and soak in as much as I can. And I think still, like, sometimes we'll do a podcast and I'll rattle some stuff off and he's like, wow, you do listen. I hate not knowing answers to things. And so I try and soak up as much information as I can.
Well, that means if you get asked a question later, you have the answer yourself, and you seem much more knowledgeable.
Right.
Just to go back to Larry Bird, Nathan Clark said his whiskey would probably be one of those that's only aged 15 minutes ago.
Yes.
Just to go with the paleness of it.
There you go. Oh yes, there you go. Perfect. It's a white dog.
Perfect.
A white bird.
White hick. White hick for French Lick.
I'm already kind of excited about this. I'm just saying it right now. But had you had any other wines or anything, or Alan, was it just like you were excited to go kind of start your own thing?
Yeah. So I when I came in, the winery had been there about 20 years, I think, and so I was very familiar with the winery. Not a big wine fan myself, but obviously a lot of people knew who they were. They had a big draw. I knew that they were in a good town to be in. Being a historian, I'd done a lot of research on West Baden and French Lick over the years, and I knew I already had some kind of idea of what I wanted to do even before I went and met with the owners face to face. And then once I met with them face to face, and I realized this is going to sound bad, and I don't mean this in any bad way. Once I realized how little they really knew about what they were trying to do, I was like, yeah, this is gonna work out well, as far as being able to step in and kind of mold this thing, because I've always went with that old quote about just needing a tall ship and a star to sail her by, right? So this was the ship. It was going to have the capacity. It was going to be in the right place. It was going to be a place in southern Indiana, not too far from where I live, that had a lot of history that connected back to where I lived at, and had a lot of opportunity to build off of those things, fill in the gaps on the parts that the family didn't understand at the time, and get it to that next level to where they were understanding it and everything was kind of firing on all cylinders. the biggest challenge was, Indiana has some interesting still prohibition era laws, like the farm distillery permit. We couldn't just go buy aged product and put it out as our own, even if we were being truthful about it, because the way that the law reads, it's got to be anything that goes in the bottle has got to be 60% yours from start to finish, from mash through distillation through maturation. So, but I saw that as an opportunity too to do some fun things that I wanted to do: absinthe and aquavit and gin, and really play around at those levels, and then also brandy, because I'm at heart I'm a brandy guy. My family, that's what we made, was apple brandy more than corn whiskey. And then ending up at Copper and Kings wasn't just because they were the only ones that I could get an interview with. I got an interview with others, but I have very intense interest in brandy. So being able to work at a winery, there's obviously some kinship between wine and brandy that I thought I'd be able to play off of.
Mike and I went to Distill America this year, and Wollersheim is a distillery winery as well too, and they were releasing their first bottled and bond brandy. So it was more like a vintage brandy is what they were kind of working for. And surprisingly, I don't want to say surprisingly, because a lot of brandy is drank up in Wisconsin. I think a chunk of the U.S.'s market.
Yeah.
But it was really good for what it was. Of course, we got it at cask strength, not whatever it was, so that was even better. You always like that. But yeah, so I was really surprised by that. I dug that one quite a bit.
Brandy seems to be a people who watch Fargo and people who might be characters in Fargo sort of drinks. So
my father-in-law's Swiss, so I came into this just totally into whiskey, bourbon, Scotch, rye, that kind of thing, Irish. And when I married my wife and met him, he's Swiss, so he introduced me to all these European, different German style schnapps and brandies, and he got me on the Calvados and just and so my question is, you guys are a winery. Any thoughts on producing a grappa?
Yeah, so we don't have what I would call a true grappa, but what we do, there was about a 2-year period where we were kind of trying to, find our legs, figure out production schedule, how much of everything we're going to need. The goal was always to get all of the bourbons up to bottled and bond. But let's say there was like 1 or 2 days a week that might have been, for lack of any better word, fuck off days. So there are a lot of byproducts that come out of a winery. And one of the things that they have at the winery is they have a small vineyard where they grow a lot of white grapes. And of course, they don't use the leaves for anything. So they were taking these leaves and they were getting rid of them, dumping them. And I saw them in a tote one day and I didn't have anything going on. I'm like, what the hell are you doing with that? Well, we're going to put it down drain. I was like, no, you're not. Wheel it back here in the distillery and I'll run it through the still and do a single pass on it with 4 plates. And so every year now, whenever they get to their white wines from the vineyard, I take the leaves and I run those through basically as a grappa, but without the skins, obviously. Okay. But it comes off just like a grappa. It's very heavily flavored like a grappa. Mm-hmm. It's distilled one time up to about 125 proof. It gets barreled at 125. So I've got, I think, about 2 53-gallon barrels of that stuff. That it's some of the best stuff we've ever made coming off the still, believe it or not. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, I think that's really a very underappreciated spirit here in the States. I mean, the company I'm with, we travel to Germany ever so often for big trade shows. And whenever we hit up some of the Italian vendors there, it's always, hey, you got any grappa? And they're like, oh, you know about grappa? Wait, back here. They don't have it out for everybody, but kind of saving it for themselves. And they'll pour us a glass. And I'm a big fan. So.
An interesting category of spirits too, because it's kind of like moonshine, right? It's when it's made extremely well, it's made extremely well, and when it's not, it's trash. That's there's no in between. There's no gray area with grappa. It's either really good or it's terrible.
Yep.
Sorry about that. I was typing for a second. What makes Spirits of French Lick unique in Indiana and in the overall marketplace?
So we are the largest pot still distillery in the state of Indiana, for one thing. Obviously, Indiana has a long history of distilling, and we play off of that. We like to think that we are the true successors to that. There are a couple others of us that we think probably fall in that category too. What makes us special is that our methodology is different. We're not trying to replicate anything that's happening in Kentucky. Not that we don't love what's happening there. We love all the big brands that come out of Kentucky, and they're all obviously making good stuff. But they're sort of, to some extent, I guess you'd say, paralyzed by conjecture. So, they're very much all in the same vein as far as their products go. They're all running either very similar mash bills or very similar yeasts, or almost identical low rectification Kentucky column stills, and that's all a part of industrialization of bourbon making. So nowadays everybody thinks of bourbon as it's this one thing that we're familiar with from Kentucky, and it tastes very similar to these products. But what they don't understand is that there's a wider array of bourbon potentialities, and there's also, it's not new. Those things all existed before that industrialization happened. And so what we're trying to do is reintroduce the idea of Hoosier distilling, the Hoosier style of bourbon, and approach it's more about respect the grain. It's almost a farm distiller sort of thing, whereas opposed to using a barrel to drive 60 to 70% of your flavor profile, you're trying to blend and balance everything, almost more like a brandy distiller. So you want to respect the terroir of the grain, where it's from, especially if it's grown in Indiana, and sort of balance, the raw material with the fermentation, with the distillation, 50% and then 50% maturation. I think, as far as I know, short of MGP, I think we are the only distillery in the state of Indiana propagating our own yeast, propagating multiple yeast varieties, using a lot of alternative grains. We use a lot of oats in our mash bills. We use a lot of kasha and buckwheat, malted rye, etc. It's just a different overall approach that might be a little more philosophical, I think, than a lot of the other distilleries in the state of Indiana tend to be. And we have to be, right? Because we're in bourbon's backyard. So we're right up next to bourbon country. So we have to fight for people think the river is magic. Nothing good can come from the north side of the river, And as somebody whose family's from Kentucky, what I always say is, the smart ones in my family figured out that they could swim across that river, and they got to this side. So, and I love Kentucky. Don't get me wrong. I absolutely love them. But and it's funny, it's not, people in Kentucky don't treat us like that. The people in Kentucky love us, and they love our products. It's Hoosiers who had parents that were from Kentucky, or Hoosiers who have no connection to Kentucky, but they got the UK license plate. There's that weird self-hating thing going on over here for whatever reason. But
I think you have to set yourself apart, right? Because Kentucky is known for their bourbon. That is their thing. It's the Derby and bourbon, and to try and play that game as a startup distillery right across the river makes zero sense. You get completely lost. You're constantly trying to live up to expectations that somebody else has set that don't have anything to do with you or what you're trying to do. And so you kind of have to learn to pivot and completely go in a totally different direction. Which is why we are so vocal about the history of Indiana, and we are so, try and really be active on social media. I know a lot of those bigger companies that people love, they can't do a lot of this stuff that we can do. They can't, hop on a small podcast or invite a podcast into their barrel chai to, set up shop, and so. I don't know. I just feel like there's got to be, the approach has to be a complete 180. It can't be anything similar to what you're getting in Kentucky, because there is no point in that. You know what I mean? There's no point to that.
Well, and you guys are much more personable and accessible than some of those distilleries as well, too. And you're extremely open about your process. Mike and I were discussing and I said it to you, Jolee, when I first saw the webpage. You have the descriptions and everything for everything you make right on there. So if you're a media or you're just someone looking, it's here's the whole pamphlet as into what we're doing, how it happened, what we did. And I was like, and I think I told you this, I was like, that has to save you tons of questions from people like me that waste your whole goddamn day about, I've already went over 7 times today how we make our fucking bourbon. Your
information's a whiskey nerd's wet dream. Seriously,
the flip side to that is, I know that there's a lot of lying in marketing, and there's a lot of, the dark arts, as Alan will call it. But that's not who I am. And I'm running this jam. So, and I think Alan and I we were very eye to eye on that from the beginning, where it was like, let's just tell them what it is. Let's be honest. Let's be open. This is who we are. This is where we came from. This is what we're doing. This is why it's different. And this is why you should try it. And I think that our enthusiasm helps fuel that, because people, when you make yourself accessible, people can see that you're a genuine person, you're authentic. And the marketing is that we're excited about this product. I'm not trying to pull the wool over on somebody's eyes about the weeder, or we're not trying to, do a big flashy campaign or anything like that. I mean, we're a small distillery. There's only so much you can afford to do when you're arguing for shelf space. So why not just be ourselves?
Yeah. And the two dirtiest words in the distilling industry are trade and secrets, in my opinion, because I can tell you right now, I can tell any distiller on the face of the planet exactly what I do and exactly how I do it. And because of differences in their raw materials, their water, the stills they're using, even if they're using pot stills, they're not going to be exactly the same as mine. Even if they are the same as mine, every pot still has its own character. They're going to make cuts different. They're going to age differently. They're never going to mimic, and that's not bragging on my distilling at all. It's my distilling could be shit. They'd still never mimic it. Because you can't. There's just no way to do that. There's too many variables involved, so I'd like to be really open with everything that we do. And I love talking to other distillers. And, a while ago, I had a call from a distiller whenever I jumped on here with you guys. If you guys saw me reach up to the screen, I forgot to turn my notifications off. But I'll tell anybody everything that we do, because it doesn't hurt us in any way, and it gets people talking about us and it keeps them interested. And I've said from the get-go, the one thing that I want out of this distillery is that I want this to be one of those distilleries that other distillers want to come to. And to me, that's the trick. If you can get other distillers interested, you're doing something right, for sure.
Well, and that's part of it. Like, once you get into it and you start going to these festivals and you start meeting them and they come to you. And I mean, that is one of the best parts of my job, is all of these dope people that I get to meet that I wouldn't have met in another life. And so when you see the brotherhood and the sisterhood between distillers and how they talk about their mash bills and how they ran their still, and all of these, like you said, whiskey nerd things, and how excited they get. So why wouldn't the general public, who is really into craft whiskey right now, why wouldn't they want to know all of that stuff, And so just take that, geekdom to a whole new level.
Yeah. Well, and I'd already started talking to you guys about coming on the channel, but when we had Robert Licorice on, he, at the very end of the thing, he was like, you need to talk to Alan Bishop. He's like the grain whisperer. He's just the Amanda Palmer and other stuff they're doing. And we're like, and we had already know what they did with grain. We're like, well, this makes this night so much more interesting,
Right.
and it's very accurate too. But I mean, like you said, it's like getting respect from other distilleries that are doing fantastic stuff.
Yeah.
We already, we tasted like, oh, well, I can see you guys are, similar path. And Nathan Clark earlier brought up the thing. He wants you to do a collaboration with him. He was already excited about it. But yeah, I was going to say you are definitely getting that kind of saturation in the distillery market. A couple quick questions from the chat, just because I don't forget them like I did before. Amazing Hazels wanted to know, are there any barrels you're putting away for the next generation to pop? So kind of thinking
first
super
off,
forward.
Amazing Hazels has the best Bloody Mary mix of all time, hands down.
Is it spicy
Get
and
it
dark?
for yourself.
Is it spicy and dark? Because
yes.
Now it's up my alley.
Yeah, it's like lunch. It's amazing. Hazels. See what I did there?
Nice. Yes. Yes.
You can tell she's in marketing.
Right. That's one of the other things that makes us different. We like to talk a lot. Yeah, there are a lot of barrels that are put back for the next generation, for sure. For whoever steps into my shoes down the road, whether it's my own daughter Penny or if it's one of the Doties or whoever I train in the future, once I'm retired or whatever, there are barrels that will be there on site for a very long time. I won't tell you that there will ever be there won't ever be bourbons probably upwards of 14 or 15 years of age coming from us because of our aging situation is very unique. There could be. That doesn't mean there won't be. There could be. But there are certainly products that will hold up to that we've done on purpose. We do a single pass Calvados style brandy that is run on 4 plates and held just like the grappa around 125, 130. It's very heavy bodied. It's very, for lack of any better word, rustic. So it needs to set for a while. That will certainly be there for 15 or 20 years. There are some whiskeys that we're doing in very neutral barrels. We do we won't be able to call this whiskey this when it comes out, but there is a American style poachine, which is kind of a tribute to
Nice.
Irish moonshine, but then also we paid tribute to Scotch whiskey as well because it's got a little bit of smoked malt from Indiana in it. Some of those barrels are on their 3rd and 4th use, and so they're very, very light barrels. Those, and they're brandy barrels, by the way. Some of those are going to set for a very, very long time, 20, 25 years. No reason to rush them out there. We're never going to sell a whole lot of that product to begin with. There is a barrel of Catawba brandy that if it's in any way, shape, or form left up to me, after it reaches, let's call it maybe 5 to 6 years, it's not quite there yet. It'll probably get transferred to a very much more neutral barrel and be set aside in that warehouse. There are some very strange whiskeys, like 100% rye, and that's malted rye. Some of those will probably set for years and years and years because they'll be able to hold up to it. So the goal is always to have some of those things that down the line somebody else will appreciate. So
we talked about the malted rye, or oh no, we were talking about the caramel barley. We were like, I brought it up when I was talking about it in I think the 4-grain. I was like, what do you think a whole like a caramel malted barley just release would be like by itself? I'm like, probably a pain in the ass to get that much malt, caramel malt, but at the same time, we're like, it sounds delicious, and I haven't even touched it.
So the really beautiful thing about those brewers malts is it doesn't take a whole lot to get their flavor. So, but like with caramel malt, it's been roasted, so you lose a lot of yield. Like if you try to ferment that, you wouldn't get much yield off of it. But what we have done is we do have 3 or 4 batches of American single malt in new American oak, which is kind of unique. And what we did is we went 90% Maris Otter, which is an old traditional malt that brewers and distillers use. And then we went 10% Gambrinus or honey malt.
Okay.
And I can tell you that the White Dog that came off the still was probably some of the best whiskey that I've ever been involved in. Real curious to see what that does over the next couple of years. And then we did a corn whiskey that'll come out as a bottled and bond in a couple of years. 90% corn, 10% chocolate malt. So completely different from mellow corn. So
that sounds lovely.
It's amazing.
Yeah, that chocolate malt really comes through a lot.
I'm gonna jump one more question to the chat, and then I'm gonna get back to 1 or 2 I had, because we usually do an hour. If you guys are cool with staying on longer, we can go longer, but we don't want to eat up your whole night either. So Nathan Clark, when you mentioned the buckwheat, he wanted to know if the mashing or distilling is done differently since there's no gluten in it.
I had not really considered the non-gluten factor. We tend to mash that the same way that we do our rye. So that gets dropped in at 170 on the way down. So we go up to 190 for the corn, and then we drop to 170 to add our small grains in. Once we hit at 170, we're usually holding there for 15 or 20 minutes, which is probably not necessary with the buckwheat in particular. But the flavor retention of that buckwheat is fantastic. So process-wise, I'm pretty happy with how it works out. You probably could get away with shortening the process a little bit during the cook. But our methodology, I'm pretty happy with everything we have. And whenever I switch up methodology, unless it's for something that's way different, like single malt whiskey, I'm working with other guys that I'm also training as they go. And so like if I throw a monkey wrench into their day, I'm the asshole. So, so if I can keep things relatively the same, and it works out quality wise, then I'm happy with that. That buckwheat also includes a little bit of kasha, which is toasted buckwheat, which is really what brings the flavor through. And it really brings a lot of, kind of mocha characteristics, very earthy characteristics. It's surprisingly good. Surprisingly good.
Side note, I went to high school with somebody named Nathan Clark. So I don't know if it's the same guy. Probably not, but
Nobody likes you that much.
I didn't say he was following me now. I'm just saying, like, I sat next to the dude at every graduation for my whole life.
How many times did you graduate?
Kindergarten, 6th grade, 8th grade, and high school.
Really? See, here in Pekin, Indiana, they give you one and they're like, go on about your day.
Yeah, I didn't, oh yeah, Nathan, no, he says he's from Iowa, so no. Too bad, Nathan. We would have had fun sitting next to each other.
Not everything's about you, Red.
I just thought it was interesting, Alan, is all right? Shut your bald face.
See the Pantera music, Patty.
So, all right. So, I have a question. So, all these fantastic sounding whiskeys that you've named that you're making, is there something that you can't make, or that you want to make but you can't?
Oh, there's a whole lot of things that I would like to make that don't make any sense whatsoever. Like with my home distilling background and the Alchemist Cabinet, blog and all that stuff, there's a lot of things, and I talk to a lot of people that are even geekier than I am. But I've spent an inordinate amount of time and money like trying to recreate chartreuse just to see if it could be done. And there's no need for it. Chartreuse is great. Nobody's going to come out with a craft chartreuse and anybody give a shit other than being a marketing gimmick. The one that I would really like to make, I wish that there was a wider appreciation in the United States for white, lighter style whiskeys, not moonshines, but lighter style whiskeys that can be enjoyed almost like schnapps. I would really be interested in playing around with some highline distillations, running just a deflator on the pot still, and using oats and probably jasmine rice to really get an interesting flavor profile for a lighter whiskey that you could just you just have as a shooter or whatever. Unfortunately, I don't know that we, on the higher end of drinkers, I don't know that you have a culture that is quite at that point yet. Very interested in botanical distillations because I find them incredibly hard. But again, people don't know how to take some of that stuff. I mean, absinthe comes and goes in waves because it catches on in popularity and then it wanes off, and you have really bad absinthes and then you have good absinthes, but people still, even now, I mean, it's been legal in the U.S. since 2007, 2008. Even now, people still don't understand absinthe. Not really. I mean, very little real understanding of it. When you do get somebody that understands it, they're like on the extreme end of it. They understand it in a way the distiller doesn't understand it. So
yeah.
All right, I'm gonna bring us back to one other question I had, and it's just because this got me intrigued. Is you guys seem like you put a lot more emphasis on yeast strains than other distilleries, where they kind of gloss over that. And you guys really seem like you get into it, because I know you go to different places to collect certain yeast strains from like historic Indiana distillers. I know you were in St. Louis recently trying to pick something up to make something for them. Why is that such an exciting part for you guys, where everyone, I mean, I know respect the grain, that's a big part, but this is something that I don't see most other distilleries getting into very much.
So part of that is that the yeast strain thing was lost in both the U.S. and in Scotland because of industrialization. The yeast strain used to be considered a part of terroir, and that was really the distiller's primary job, was to be a yeast maker and be able to keep a yeast strain going and continue to work that yeast strain to make the profile of whiskey that he or she wanted. For us, it's very much about having an understanding of pot still distillation being all about retention and concentration of flavor, and where all those different flavors come from. Modern bourbon writers will tell you that, maybe in a white dog you get upwards of 15% of your flavor in a white dog from a yeast. And then they'll say once it hits the barrel, that goes away completely. And my working hypothesis that is still, we're still running through that right now, and we're still seeing the results of it, is that is complete bullshit when you're talking about a pot still. When you're talking about a pot still and you're talking about being able to balance everything 50-50, you can go 6, 7, 8, 9 years, and that yeast strain can still have upwards of 15 to 20% of that flavor profile, because the yeast is such a big part of making that initial whiskey that you're going to work off of what it is. I mean, the other part of it with the historic yeast strains, especially the ones from here in southern Indiana, the Spring Mill yeast strain, the McCoy Distillery yeast strain, as of now the Cave River Valley yeast strain, that's all about bringing back that distilling heritage, because the 6-county region that we're in, that was called the Black Forest of southern Indiana, Washington, Orange, Lawrence, Crawford, Harrison, and Perry County, there were 155 distilleries that were operational and commercial, not counting all of the illegal distilleries. Of those 155, there are now less than 3 buildings left remaining. One of them was simply a tool room, had nothing to do with distillation really whatsoever. Another one has now been converted to a garage. That's the McCoy Distillery. And the third one is the Spring Mill Distillery, which still stands in all of its glory and still has a lot of its equipment extant on the site. So some of these distillers that I've researched, first of all, the only thing that you might find of any of them is a gravestone. And a lot of times you're lucky if you can even find that, if that still exists. And artifacts are even harder to come by. So if we want to bring back some of the distilling history and some of the traditional terroir of the state of Indiana, being able to capture a yeast strain that was actually used by those distillers, that's a living piece of that distillery that we can actually put back into production, have a little bit of an idea of what their flavor profile was, especially if, for example, I know their mash bills. Good examples being with the McCoy and the Spring Mill. They're night and day from one another. The McCoy yeast by far is the single most traditional yeast that we use out of everything that we use. If we run a high rye bourbon with McCoy yeast, it literally tastes just like a high rye bourbon that's coming off of one of the big column stills in Kentucky. It has that much effect on it. The St. Louis thing is cool because that's going to be used for products, a product and or two products that literally only go to the St. Louis market as kind of a love letter to the state, to the city of St. Louis. I really like that place. They've been very supportive of us, and so we wanted to do something that played off of their brewing history there in the town. And we were able to go into some of the old lagering caves and collect that yeast. So
that looked like a fun trip. I mean, I like stuff like that. So I mean, like going underneath the city and other stuff that's going on. But I'm a history nerd, so that's
that place was crazy too, because when you go in, you go into the initial basement, and it's like standard 8-foot underground or whatever, and you're like, oh, this is cool, and then they take you down another flight of steps, and you go down like 25 feet, and you're like, all right, now we're getting somewhere, and that's their main brewery area. And then there's another set of steps off to the right-hand side that drops down like 5 feet, and that puts you in the lagering cave. Come back up the 5 steps, you go over to a corner, and there's this trap door, and they open it up, and they're telling me about it. It's part of the old Cherokee cave system, and apparently they used to use that to move beer barrels underneath the town. And I'm like, I'm in. I have to. And there was nothing good and useful yeast-wise that was going to come out of that lower section. It was all going to come out of the lagering cave, and I knew that. But I had the fucking excuse to get to go down into this cave system, and I'm like, oh, fucking, we're going one way or the other. We're going down there.
That's awesome. Just going back a little bit, as it happens in the chat, they were talking about the lighter whiskey. Emily was asking not even if you specifically marketed lighter whiskey as gluten-free or differently artisanal. Is it because there's still not growth potential or just not enough at this point?
I think right now it would be a matter of not enough. So it's the same as like, take for example the absinthe. There you can sell some, right, and you'll do okay with it, and you may even develop a name for it, but it's still such a limited market until a major player gets involved, right? So we saw our absinthe sales spike a little bit at the beginning of the year. And the reason that they did is because why can't I think of their name? The guys that do the old Tom Gin in England. there's a lot of those. Hendrix. Hendrix decided they were going to do a clear absinthe, Le Bleu absinthe at like 98 proof or 100 proof or something like that. And like all of a sudden, out of nowhere, for about 2 months, absinthe was like a hot item because people who were kind of tangentially involved in absinthe saw that it was, kind of doing a thing, and Hendrix is doing it, so it must be more serious now. So if you had a larger distiller that did something like that, it kind of opens the gates, and then two, it's and we're unique. We're kind of the apothecary of distilleries because we got something for everybody. But when we're dealing with like marketing absinthe versus or gin or Old Tom or aquavit or even the brandies, we're not necessarily marketing those to the same crowd of bourbon drinkers because there's not really a lot of crossover there for whatever. Even people who are into alternative bourbons, they don't really cross over to the other side. So
it's also all gluten free, and so I feel like that's a little gimmicky as well.
Yeah.
So I would rather just educate someone and let them know that if they see that on a bottle, then that's just somebody trying to grab your attention. You know what I mean? Like, let's
just
talk
fucking
about
words. When I see it, I'm like, oh, you're just playing bullshit. Sorry, I had a PR background, and when I see stuff like that, I'm like,
yeah,
well, that's just bullshit,
Right. And it's definitely a good question. I mean, I asked it in the beginning, like, can we put gluten-free on the label? And it was like, no. So, but it, all of it is gluten-free. And so, people with celiac should know that. We generously share that information with you.
That's awesome.
So dealing with the marketing, I love this whole concept you've got. Spirits of French lick, and it's kind of like a double meaning because obviously you're selling spirits, but you're talking about some historical characters and parts of Indiana. So was that your concept, Jolee, or is that something you guys kind of fleshed out together, or how did that come to be?
No, I came into the distillery about 2 years ago, and a lot of those were already in the bottle. Okay. And it's really a lot of that is based off of Alan's passion for distilling history in Indiana. And so it's just super infectious, really, when you talk to him. And I'm sure that you guys have, you can see tonight, he's done a lot of the research. He's very, he loves to geek out on all of that stuff, and had been running his Alchemist Cabinet blog on WordPress for a long time before that. And so he's just taken so many deep dives that there is all of that information to pull from. And when you have, these larger companies, Basil Hayden's and, all these other ones that are based on distilling legends.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
This is what that is for us, right? Just no one remembered them. No one has talked about them. No one has brought them to the forefront. And so I know that, Alan sees that as, that's our job now.
And that brings like a whole nother level of intricacy to wanting to go to the distillery, because you're like, we were talking in one of the reviews, like it pays homage to people of the past.
Yeah.
And that, like you said, brings it forward to like,
yeah,
it's another way to make a connection.
Where would we be without those people?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It does. And we're also very conscientious of it. So like, a lot of the big distilleries that use those names, they're just touting urban legend. They're bullshit, the dark arts, whatever you want to fucking call it, they'll throw in whatever in there to sell a bottle. And so we're very conscientious that when we tell somebody's story, we make sure that it's truthful in the most accurate way that it can be. And then if you want some bullshit on top of it, I'll tell you some ghost stories about those people, and then we can go down that whole fucking metaphysical path that I get into and all that stuff.
But we're not going to base the marketing off the bullshit ghost story, right? Because these people were so cool and did like Lee Sinclair. I mean, the man, it was amazing. And for his time, what he developed and what he built, people need to know about that. And when you come to French Lick, West Baden, it is we're divided by a stoplight. It is a small tourism, or a large tourism town in the middle of nowhere, essentially. And we have these 2 huge hotels, and the most beautiful, most magnificent one, this man built. And back in a time when something like that was unthinkable. And so, and he came from, Alan's hometown and, or his county. And so, those things are important. We're located on Sinclair Street. This town, we are able to be who we are because of him.
And it's a town that shouldn't exist where it exists at either. I mean, French Lick is very unique in that the cultures that have been there between the Germans and the French, and then also its location in Indiana versus it's almost something that you would expect to see and even the feel of the town is almost something that you would expect somewhere in Appalachia. It's not something that you would necessarily expect in the state of Indiana, which makes it and that's one of the things that got me excited about coming on there was that I knew the history of the town, like I said earlier, but also if you've ever been to French Lick, at least for me, and again, this goes into some of the more metaphysical bullshit that I get into, but there's a certain feeling about that whole town. There's a certain it's almost a little bit of a darkness that kind of surrounds it. You know what I mean? Because there's been so much stuff happen there because it's a place that shouldn't exist, that is equidistanced between St. Louis, Indianapolis, Louisville, Cincinnati, and close enough to Chicago to draw the criminal element. So there's been a lot of things, a lot of deep shit happened in that town over the years. So
well, and so go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I like how a lot of distilleries now they're like a tourist stop, or at least they're becoming that way. Like it's not just we're a distillery, we're doing something you don't expect them to stop by. It's almost like you're trying to draw something in as a tourist thing, and that's kind of what our show is. Like if you're going someplace on vacation, these are places to go to, places to stop at. Because if I'm going someplace, I'm going for a show, I'm going for some event, or a distillery or some whiskey thing. But these are places to stop at when you get in an area. This is going to make the other half of your day,
Yeah,
so,
and that's one of the things I tell people on the tours is like when you come on our tour, we're not a tourist facility, right? We're set up, we can do tours, but you don't see all the squirrely, shiny copper stuff you see at some of the bigger distilleries in Louisville. But when you come, you get the full on, like you're doing a tour with the distiller or the assistant distiller, and we're giving you the history and we're giving you some of the superstition and some of the dark arts and some of the methodology, and the building itself is cool. It's an old Kimball's factory plant that made pianos, but there were very famous people who bought pianos there. Tori Amos, Bruce Springsteen, Jerry Lee Lewis, etc. But we don't have to have the campus that the big guys have or that any of the tourist stops in Louisville have, because our whole town is that campus. The dome, the hotel, that's all part of our campus. Just the landscape in general is part of the campus. And I think people appreciate that too, because you don't get... Sometimes when you go to those distilleries, in my opinion, it feels a little bit like Holiday World. It feels a little bit like Disney, I guess.
That's just what I was going to say. Disney World.
They're trying to lure you into some like false sense of like, this is what we stand for, and we're from wherever we're from, and and meanwhile they're down the road eating a damn egg salad sandwich like everybody else that works in the neighborhood. It's not anything special.
I feel like sometimes when like you just said that about Disney World, like sometimes I feel like you get in there and it's like, come on, It's a Small World ride, and you're like, I don't like this ride, damn it. Like this is a really bad ride.
Right? I just want to drink whiskey and talk shit. Like, I don't, let's get down to business.
I want to see your fermenters, damn it. Show me your fermenters.
Yeah. Are you a craft rectifier or are you distilling?
What is the name of this still? And slap it.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's it, right? Like, stills are not inherently shiny. They are dull AF. And so, you have to work to keep them, shiny and special and glittery. And that's just, it's a piece of production equipment. And so, yeah, we don't.
My girls get a bath when they earn it.
That's right. That was creepy.
It was supposed to be.
What are you guys talking about? Like the spirits of French Lick in the past and kind of using it as a double meeting. Are there any new releases you guys are coming out with that pay homage to people of the past?
Yes, so many.
Bunch, yeah.
So
I only
many.
know the one this summer from watching some other stuff, so I'm intrigued about the rest of them.
Yeah. Alan, do you
Yes.
want to talk about those?
Sure. So the first one that's coming up this summer will be Maddie Gladden. Maddie was and I'll give you a little bit of the histories as we go, and I'll try to make them very quick. Maddie was a housekeeper for Mr. Lee Sinclair, so there's a connection there when she was a teenager. She ran off, ended up in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Once she got to Chattanooga, she set up a cat house and another one in Nashville, Tennessee. She fell in love with P.T. Barnum, which is also funny because French Lick has a lot of circus connections as well. She became his mistress. He basically got tired of her and paid her off. She left and she came back to Salem, Indiana. She set up another cat house on Main Street in Salem, which pissed off all the local ladies, obviously. And she would kind of flaunt that. So she bought all these nude Grecian statues and had them put in this front picture window of the house and leave the curtains open to piss the ladies off. She would make sure that she was in every parade that the town ever had, and she was always in this big black buggy with these big white stallions with black reins on them, and she'd have two of her girls holding parasols over her during the trip. And I've said it several times, I've said it on other shows, but it's still funny. I've never seen a whore on parade, but I would go to that in a heartbeat. Especially in Salem, even as it exists nowadays. She was married 5 times. The third husband and the fifth husband were actually one and the same. When they got divorced the first time, he broke into her house and she shot him in the face with 38. So if you're going to make a spicy high rye bourbon and name it after a woman, you got to go full on, right? So then we have the rebranding of the Wieners. So we're switching away from the current wheater that we have. Same recipe, getting rid of the source juice that's in there. Not that there's anything wrong with it, and I loved it, and it did really well for us, and it brought us a lot of attention. But the goal for me, it's French Lick as a distiller, has always been to have 100% our own stuff and be bottled and bond. So January 2020, we'll roll out with the bottled and bond version. And all these that are coming out are bottled and bond, by the way. Everything from now on, bourbon-wise, will be bottled and bond unless it's a single barrel. So we're going to name that after Mr. William Dalton. William Dalton was the distiller at the Daisy Springs Distillery, which is now Spring Mill State Park. He was the longest tenured distiller that I know of in Indiana history for 55 years, working double pot still distillation when they were doing it the right way on top of fire, including cooking their mash over top of fire, etc. You can imagine the kind of life that he would have had and how beat up he was after 55 years, and his name was pretty much lost to history. Except for relatives, and then once I started doing the Alchemist Cabinet research, so I wanted to pay tribute to him. We're going to roll out next year with a rye whiskey named Solomon Scott. Solomon was a partial owner of the Daisy Spring Distillery, and also a distillery called the McCoy and Scott Distillery in Mitchell, Indiana, across from where Apple Acres is now. He was also a major moonshiner and bootlegger living outside of Paoli, Indiana. His daughter and son were also both highly involved in illicit distilling, and his son has been credited many times with saving a lot of the citizens of Stampers Creek Township during the Spanish flu by delivering moonshine to them door to door, and they said that was the only thing that really saved their lives. There's a lot of people that really believe that to this day, that the Scots were responsible for saving people's lives during the Spanish flu epidemic. So we wanted to pay a little tribute to him. What else do we have, Jolie? We got the Lee Sinclair bottled and bond coming up. We've got there's a bunch of weird stuff.
Yeah, you touched on all the major bottled and bonds. Maddie, Sinclair, Dalton, and then Scott are the 4 that are coming out in 2020 and 2021.
And then we have the buckwheat, which we haven't named.
Right. Yeah, that's still in process. And then we have a single barrel of barrel-aged Absinthe, Fascination Street. If the TTB would ever get off my ass and let me just pass a label, that's been a struggle. Can't put Absinthe on the label, but you can put it in the name. But when it's on the name, it's still part of the label. I don't know.
That leads into another question, because they asked who's doing all the paperwork for all the bottled and bond releases. I don't mean to laugh at you, just it builds up. But yeah, that would be irritating as hell, because I've come across like 2 or 3 that I found that I was like, don't think what you have written on here is legal. I don't know how you got past it. And I brought it up to the people themselves, not
the funny thing,
on
right?
the chat. But I was like, how did you get away with this? It's pretty fucking bullshit what you put on the label, you know.
You have to be. I don't know. I've learned a lot about that agency. The TTB, for those that don't know, approves every single liquor label that you see on a bottle, and they do not know their own rules, of which there are many. The absinthe rule, for example, on one line says you cannot. Absinthe is not a classification in the United States, so you cannot have absinthe on your label. However, if you include the word absinthe in your fanciful name, which is their technical term, by the way, fanciful name, then it's okay. But having done that, they rejected it, telling me I can't have absinthe on the label. So I don't. It is mind blowing to me. They say that you don't have to have an age statement on bottled and bond. Bottled and bond is obviously 4 years and above. However, our Lee Sinclair got kicked back, and they told us we had to put aged 4 years on there. There's a multitude of people, and it's left up to human error, so.
Yeah, and if you want to get something through, you submit it 3 different times, and you submit it the way you want it all 3 times, even if you know that it's not exactly what they want. Right. You'll get 3 different reviewers, and all it takes is one of them to say yes is the crazy thing. Yeah. That's all it takes.
It is literally like that. Like, I wish I could say it was more organized, but it is a bureaucratic mess. And God bless those people, because that manual of rules
is bullshit.
And I don't know. It is really crazy. And so thanks for asking that, Nathan. It's me. So feel sorry for me appropriately, please.
Thank God for Jolee, because we've had this conversation at work before with the ownership. Like, they've brought up me doing stuff before, and I'm like, you guys do not fucking want me to have anything at all to fucking do with this, because I'll get way too pissed off, and then there'll be a Facebook rant, and Jolee will have to call me late at night. And then there's also the fact that I used to be a moonshiner. You don't want this guy fucking dealing with the fucking TTB any more than he fucking has to, So
I'd be like you two. I'd be like, this is exactly what the fuck you said to do, and now you're giving me shit. And then, like you said, it'd be like, these guys suck. And right on Facebook, like, Julie would be coming next day. You need to stop texting things, damn it! And take your phone away.
Right. The most bullshit thing about it is my favorite category in the beverage alcohol manual is distilled spirit specialty, which basically underneath the category they might as well have written any kind of shit that we don't understand, despite historical precedents, we will put into this category, distilled spirit specialty.
And then, like, trying to make notes, because they have a section for notes. Like, don't put any notes in there, because I don't even think that they read them. They just see that there's notes, and they're like, not approved.
Yeah, like
pass. Yeah.
Right.
Way too in-depth. Rejected.
Reason for rejection: you made me fucking read.
Right. But label designs. I work on those. That paperwork, I do that, and then it's a team effort. Obviously, I don't put Allen's whiskey in a bottle without saying, "Hey, what do you think of this label?" It's teamwork. It
works out pretty well. Yeah, we usually like I'll throw a concept as far as a name, and then give Jolee like some tangential history, and then I might write like a side label, and then we send it to her, and then she rewrites it, and then sends it back to me, and it just bounces back and forth until we get it where it needs to go.
Yeah.
But she's the one completely 100% responsible for making shit actually happen.
I like what Eli put up here. He's like, send it in. Whatever the hell we distilled.
Yeah.
Damn it. Just
leave it be. Right. They had a big deal. It was the absinthe label has really been the pain in my ass, because we love it. First of all, I love our absinthe, and I love absinthe, and I specifically love the barrel aged absinthe. It's something that I can always smell when I walk into the distillery. I can always smell it in the barrel room, and it is one of my favorite things, hands down. And so I really want it to be on the shelf and in a bottle, but they are just really having such a hard time with, matured in new oak barrels. And they're like, well, what does that mean? And I'm like,
oh God, same thing as
what does it mean?
Same thing as a bourbon jackass. I'm so sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What fucking gets me about it is they'll pull that shit on absinthe and gin, but meanwhile, if I make a blended whiskey and I take GNS and put it in that blended whiskey and put it in a barrel, I can say aged however long it was in that barrel.
Right.
What the fuck is the difference? It's the same general concept, right?
Right. Well, and there's mistakes even on our bottles that we did that they didn't catch, that I didn't, know about. I wasn't responsible for those labels, but going back to them and looking at them now that I'm into this and I know, what I'm supposed to be looking for and what I'm supposed to be doing, I'm like, these people fucked this up from the beginning. Like, what is going on? They don't even know their own rules,
I don't want to get myself in trouble with my own label that's been here for a while, but
right,
it's wrong.
Right.
Well, that's the beautiful part of it, though, is like once it's approved, it's approved. And so
don't test it. There's one of them watching right now. Like, we've got one who can see.
Right. We love you, TTB. I'll send you cookies on Monday. Thank you.
Are you guys still good with a few more minutes? We're like at an hour 10.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Nathan was just asking Jolee, do you do the graphic design work stuff too? And how many hats do you actually wear there?
Yes, I do graphic designy stuff too. I work with a few key graphic designers that French Lick Wine and Spirits pays. So I work with a great woman named Cheryl Budd out of Bloomington from MediaWorks. She's fantastic, and she lays out all of our ads and rack cards, anything that has to do with a magazine ad. But I am very specific, and so the people that I work with are very kind to me because I basically tell them exactly what I want, and then
that's so helpful.
Yeah, yeah, and then we work with a couple of different graphic designers for our bottles, and so they're very kind because I am very picky and I am very detail oriented, and these bottled and bond labels have been a huge pet project, and they've taken a long time because I want them to be perfect.
Yeah, you want them to be right.
Right.
All right. I'm going to jump back to the distilling side for a second. You guys, the hashtag for Spirits of French Lick is respect the grain. And we absolutely love that. And you guys seem to take like a much deeper passion for unique grains. So what are some that you're using and some that you're working with or plan to be working with in the future?
So probably the grain that I'm the most in love with, we'll come back to corn here momentarily, but oats are really the big one that we love, and that's a big part of our profile for Lee Sinclair. Obviously, 60 corn, 17 wheat, 13 oats, and 10% caramel malt. And oats used to be incredibly popular in bourbon distillation, and from the 1850s up through about 1875 or so, and then they died off because they clog up column stills essentially. So when you taste Lee Sinclair, what you're tasting is a modified version of the wheated recipe, basically, is what you're tasting. And then that modification works because there's so much contrast between the oats and the wheat and the corn, plus that kind of creamy mouthfeel, etc. that you get out of it. We obviously work with buckwheat.
Term.
You're dirty person.
It is dirty. Industry term. Creamy mouthfeel. Industry term.
You just like saying that at this point because you can get away with it. So, fuck, I forgot where it was. Okay, anyways.
Pretty mouthfeel as the banjo music starts playing in the background.
Right. We obviously play with a lot of different brewers malts with different roasts, caramel malt, victory malt, chocolate malt, Gambrinus malt, etc. And then we are using several different corn varieties. We grow about 15 to 30 acres of one of the corn varieties that I worked on for years and years and years called Amanda Palmer, named after the lead singer of the Dresden Dolls. So that corn variety was a cross of 150 plus different open pollinated landrace heirloom corn varieties from basically every time a diaspora left Oaxaca, Mexico. I tried to find that and then fold it back into some of the old southern dent corn populations, and then select for what did really well for my farm. Eventually, it didn't start out as a distilling corn project. It started out as a food corn project. But again, at the time that I was doing it, nobody was interested. So it became very distilling centric, and it became a matter of looking for not only agronomic traits that worked for my production style, but then for traits that work for distillation. We're also playing around with Cateto corn, which is an old South American variety that was actually a big export variety and was also very big in the southern U.S. up until about 1909 or so. Dark pumpkin orange, very high carotenoid, very high free amino acid content, a lot of safflower sort of flavors, rose water flavors, etc. That one I'm absolutely in love with, and I do have my own strain of that I would like to find somebody to really grow on a larger scale in the future in Indiana. And make that a bigger part of our repertoire. I'm very interested in different colors of corn and the different amino acids that are there and the way that those come across during distillation. I have a freezer full of seed varieties that I've developed that I hope to kind of introduce to distilling over time, whether that's through us or through other distillers, one way or the other. It doesn't matter as long as it gets out there. It does more use out in the world than it does studying in my freezer, that's for sure.
Poor Kim.
Hey, I have my own fucking seed freezer, all right? You just don't
Oh
want.
God, your poor wife.
Did she force you to get a new fridge or a freezer or something at
Right?
home, bro?
Yeah.
Oh my
'Cause
god,
he
this
took
is
up the
like a
entire refrigerator
continuing.
with yeast samples.
This is a fucking
poor
continuing
woman.
thing in my life. Like, it started out with the seed thing, and then I had to get a freezer for the seeds. And she's still pissed because the freezer above the refrigerator is also full. And then now I've got like 2 refrigerators at work for yeast samples. I've got 2 at the house because we got our refrigerator, and then I've got my refrigerator. You know, I might have a problem. I'm just saying.
You might have a problem.
Might have.
And you're getting those letters every month from the energy company saying if you would reduce some of your kitchen appliances, you could save some energy there.
The great thing about that, though, is that I'm just enough of a survivalist hillbilly that I have solar panels, so I'm golden.
There you go. Yeah.
It's like the special shed has all the solar panels to run all the.
Right.
There are some special sheds, yes, for sure.
Oh, that's awesome. I was gonna say. Oh, we had another question. We saw that you were using, I think, on the Wheater and the Lee Sinclair, that you guys were using like a number 2 char with just toasted heads. Am I right?
Yeah. That's kind of our that's our modus operandi with barrels. Is so
Yeah.
for one, we don't use any cheats in distilling whatsoever. Again, not knocking anybody, but what I mean by that is we don't use any small barrels ever. It's always 53 gallon or larger. I have one Anne Gray Cooperage 5-gallon barrel they sent me as a sample, and if I was going to use small barrels, that's the company I would go with because it's the most beautifully built barrel I've ever seen in my life.
What's the name of the company again?
And
Anne Gray Cooperage. They're
Okay.
up in northern Indiana. But everything is 53 gallon and larger. Never anything smaller than that. We may do a limited run of apple brandy and some 30-gallon barrels in the future because that was the traditional Hoosier apple brandy barrel, was always 30 gallons. But number 2 char is very, very important to what we do because number 2, first of all, the char, people don't necessarily understand char and toast. The char is really there as the filtration methodology. It's not really adding that much flavor to anything. The toast, as far as flavor goes, is far more important. So we start with a medium plus toast. Then we go to a number 2 char. The thing about the number 2 char that we really like is that it's not overdriving the whiskey. It's not over filtering the whiskey. We've got pot stills. We can make really good heads and hearts and tails cuts, depending on how long or how short we're going to age it. So the number 2 char has given us a lot more lignin, and that lignin is super important to the style and profile of whiskey. I just almost fucking Ric Flaired it right there. There should have been a woo in there. But it gives more lignin, which is kind of like toasted coconut, toasted hazelnut sort of flavors. And since we're making that fruitier style of whiskey, and sometimes even a more herbal style of whiskey, having those sort of nutty profiles seem to work out really well with the styles of whiskey that we're making. I don't think we have, actually I'm positive, we don't have anything that's a 3 or a 4 in the building, and we probably never will unless it's for a contract distilled product. And then that also plays well with, on our bourbons, we do very low entry proof. So we go in at 105, which nowadays is a little more common than it was, say, 20 years ago. But that was the old pre-prohibition thing when people were just selling barrels to grocers. They wanted to be as close to 100 proof as they could because people were just going to come to the store and buy, out of the barrel and fill up their own jug. But what that really does for us is that does a couple different things. First of all, water is actually a better solvent on wood than ethanol is, so we're able to extract a little more from the barrel. B, what you actually do is you're actually destabilizing the alcohol to some extent, so you're actually getting some micro-oxidization at that lower proof than you would be at a higher proof. But number 2 also plays really well with things that we barrel right off the still. So all of the brandies are barreled directly off the still. They're 135, 140 sometimes. And that number 2 works out extremely well with that as a consequence too. So for anybody that's ever going to buy an apple brandy single barrel, bear in mind that there is a possibility that you could bottle up to 135 proof. So
Nice.
yeah,
It's all about that pot still. You don't want to lose that. I see Scott from My Bourbon Journey is on, and he created a hashtag, maybe unknowingly for us, but he said pot still funk. I think it was like
amazing.
2 years ago when he did our Lee Sinclair and the Weeder review, and that stuck. And I hashtag pot still funk for almost everything that we do, because that is a huge part, if not all of it, is what we're all about. And so that barrel, we don't want a number 4 or number 5 char eating our pot still funk. We want it to be there in the end.
Pot stills are the girl that your mother warned you about.
Yeah. And we were thinking that the number 2 char was actually letting more of the grain play showcase to what was going on, rather than the barrel kind of taking over.
Yeah.
And Scott's drinking the Weeder, and you saw what this was at earlier. So
another well-loved bottle.
This one was much higher before we started the stream, and it's steadily. I'm getting nervous because they might both be gone by the end of it. That's my problem.
The Weeder is just a good, nice little set down drink, and you just sit down and enjoy it, and you don't have to overthink it too much. It's got, but the thing that I love about the Weeder is that it has that familiarity that you have from, it's the only traditional mash bill that we make. So meaning that it's the only mash bill that other distilleries make. It's basically the same mash bill as Makers and Pappy and Weller, etc., Larceny. But it has a little bigger, a little sweeter nose to it, and it actually has a little bit of black pepper to it, which you don't necessarily get out of those other products. And it's a good one. You can blind taste people on it against other wheated bourbons that are certainly at a higher price point than ours. And if they don't see the bottle, you have about 9 times out of 10 you can actually flip somebody on that.
Yeah. Are there any chance to release that at a higher proof?
All of those bottled and bonds that we talked about earlier, including the William Dalton, we've made enough of now because we've planned on doing bottled and bond for a couple of years now, that those will be available as single barrels. I mean, everything that we have, Lee Sinclair, Matty Gladden, Solomon Scott's, William Dalton, those are all going to be available as single barrels at a higher proof. Typically with 105 entry, we'll pull anywhere after 3-4 years, 109 to 112. But we did start doing something a couple years ago that I call it's basically targeted single barrels. So what we're doing is we're doing everything the way that we normally do it. We don't change anything up except for we switch out the yeast for one of the historic yeast strains. And then when we get that batch done, we barrel it at 118 as opposed to 105. So in a couple years, there's going to be potentially some much overproof versions of those as well, maybe as high as 120, 122. It could even be higher depending on the warehouse that it's in.
Nice.
So do you guys do you have a barrel pick program?
Mm-hmm. We sure do. Yeah. And when life is normal, it's a lot of fun because you get people. We handle it, more like the big distillers used to handle it, where we have people come in, and I don't I don't kick 5 barrels out on the floor and say, here's your choices. So I give you the full on tour, and then we go in the warehouse and I go, all right, what do you want to try? And if you want to try, 7 or 8 samples, we're going to try 7 or 8 samples, and you can try 7 or 8 different things, while you're in there. It's by the end of it, you've had a good time and you're going to buy something for sure.
Right.
So,
The COVID way is Jolee going in on Sundays and drilling barrels and walking out smelling like I'm covered in bourbon, because I am, and trying to do all of that by myself.
I make Pedro do a lot of that too.
No, I know you do. I know, but I've had to do my fair share.
You have. It's good for you.
I learned not to wear good clothes.
Well, and Eli brought up a good point. Like maybe when this whole thing's done, we might be able to make our way down there. You guys have some
absolutely.
fantastic stuff, and we would love to get behind something like that, because it is really great for what you're doing. And like we were saying before, for only being 4 years old, I think the least Sinclair we had might only been 2. None of your stuff tastes like the age it is. It is all the crummy.
Those Lee Sinclair is aged completely differently too. Tell them about the chai, Alan.
Yeah, so the warehouses we have that plays a huge part in what we do. The chai where Lee Sinclair is barreled at, chai basically it means brandy cellar. So it's a warehouse that's all block. It's connected to part of the building. It has no active heating. It's all passive heating and cooling from the rest of the building. Everything is on wine racks basically. It typically 30 to 40 degree differential throughout the year, and no very high temperatures, no very low temperatures, but it does age the entire time it's there. So like
only
2-year-old,
4 high.
Right? 2-year-old for us would be very different from 2 years old in an unheated warehouse, in Kentucky or wherever, because it's actually stayed in action that entire 2 years as opposed to just several seasons of those 2 years. Real high angel share, like 7% a year. Which is enough to get me fired from anywhere else. But that's because of the high humidity. That also gives us the concentration and retention that we want. Whereas the other warehouse is more like a Scottish-style dunnage. A lot of ventilation all the way around. Barrels are only 4 high. Certain things don't do well in the chai, so anything with more than, call it 70% corn, high rye bourbon, rye whiskey, they do not like that chai at all. So they need that more dynamic environment that they can go into to do what they need to do. But to kind of sweeten the pot for you guys too, one of the fun things if you come down to do a barrel pick is, remember I mentioned the first couple of years we were in business, there was a lot of, Alan's fucking bored on Tuesday. So there are these small lots of barrels that are very unique, mash bills, or there's even one called Fubar. So,
There is.
That was
Old Nipsey.
That was an old still hand I had. We called him Mibs, and he's a great dude, but he didn't pay any attention to anything, and so that's got that was a very expensive mash bill because it's got a lot of rye malt in it that it was not supposed to have in it, and it's delicious. There's like 3 or 4 barrels of that. There's some 100% rye in there in small amounts. There's
Do you think the TTB will let us call it Fubar?
They're going to let us call it Fubar one way or the other.
It's the same label 3 times, damn it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
Right. Hit submit in rapid succession.
That's right. That's
Like
right.
Monday, Wednesday, Friday. There we go. We'll be good by next Thursday.
Right. Right. Yeah, we're calling it Fubar one way or the other. Fubar's for sure going on that fucking label.
Yeah, I know.
But yeah, there's a lot of those fun little like one-off things that we did that, and not that you have to take something like that. Obviously, if you want a Lee Sinclair, or you want a Matty Gladden, or an Old Clifty Apple Brandy, we have plenty of that stuff. So it'll be a good time.
It sounds like Mike went to Iron Root where he tried to leave and drive home, and he just didn't quite get to do that.
Yeah,
really gonna drive home.
Was highly generous. It was like, come on, try this. Now try this. It's like, dude, that was 7 samples out of the barrels, straight out of the barrel, and then he said, well, let's come to the tasting room. It's like,
And they're doing some awesome stuff too, so I'm sure you're.
Yeah, and some of their stuff was just Unbelievable, straight out of the barrel.
Yeah.
Oh, I had Robert on my podcast the other day, and I've known him. He came to visit Copper and Kings whenever I first started there, and I told him the other day on that show. He was telling me he just bought an antique alembic from like 1954 in Cognac, France.
Amazing.
And he was talking about some of the different brandy varietals he was planting and the different corns he was playing with. I said, I'm just going to move down there and live in a shed behind your distillery, man.
I'll have my own shed with a still behind yours. It's just separate.
Right. Separate.
I'm not
entity,
living in a shed, Alan.
Listen, we can train you to be the distiller at this distillery. I'll go out there and we will have Spirits of French Lick West.
I already tell people I'm the master distiller. That is nothing to me.
You probably have as much legitimacy to that claim as most of the fucking master distillers in big distilleries. So you're not lying to people. It's true. You know.
That's awesome. Before we let you guys go, I got just one more question. Are you guys planning on entering any competitions coming up in the future? And if so, which ones? I know it costs a lot of money and stuff, but I'm just intrigued because I think you would do well.
We do competitions every year. Let's see. This year we did the San Francisco International Competition. We took Old Clifty Apple Brandy there, and it won a bronze, which was pretty freaking cool. I know people don't get excited about bronze, but that was San Francisco, and so that was pretty exciting for us. We do Denver International. Our Lee Sinclair gets silvers there. I think we've done it with them 2 or 3 times now. The Weeder has gone out. The Aquavit has got a double gold at Denver last year, as did, what else got a gold, Alan? There was one more.
Was it? I want to say the gin got.
Yeah, the gin, the absinthe got something too. But yeah, it's they have they've got hardware when you walk into the distillery. We've got them all properly displayed. We've been to the SIP Awards. We've been on to the Northern Bourbon Whiskey competition. There's been a few that we've done.
We've won a bunch through the American Distilling Institute.
Yeah.
Nice.
At some point in time, probably
was through ADI.
Yeah, gin was double gold, best of class, and best of category at ADI.
Yeah.
Is that the one we couldn't afford to go to, Ben?
Which one? The ADI? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We looked at going to that one and we're like, oh no, we're not paying that much to get in. Like, sorry.
It's generally runs anywhere between $250 and $500 for a submission. So you really have to, for a small distillery, you have to think about where you're spending your dollars.
Yep.
That's a lot of Facebook advertising. That's a lot of.
I start to get weird about them too. And Jolee and I were talking about this recently. So like. Next year, I definitely want to send to New Orleans, without a doubt, with the bottled and bond stuff. But I get like weird about them, especially like the distillers ones, the ones where you actually have like distillers that are on panels. Because as a distiller, I will be the first to admit that we're all a bunch of pretentious cocksuckers. So, we like the smell of our own farts. So, if you enter a competition where distillers are judging you, and you're on the West Coast, and you're sending them a brandy that is outside of that West Coast mentality, they're going to destroy it. If you are in a competition on the East Coast, and you send them a bourbon that's outside of that Kentucky mentality, they're going to destroy it. And again, and I've seen it with my friends that are distillers. I've been invited to be on panels before too, and I turned it down because I think it's such a douchey thing to do. But I'll see people that I know have never distilled a drop of absinthe in their life, don't know anything about the art of it. They know all about bourbon, but they'll be on an absinthe panel. And I'm like, you really have no business whatsoever being involved in an absinthe panel. You can't know what you don't know. How do you know what's out of the ordinary if I know that you're not an absinthe drinker and you also don't distill absinthe? So the ones that are judged by real people, and I don't care if it's a sampling of 50 people off the street in New York, that don't ordinarily drink. Those are the ones that I appreciate. Cocksucker would be a good name for the absinthe. That's fucking great.
My most favorite, which just goes to prove the point, because this is how this all came about, was we sent the apple brandy out to 2 separate competitions. And one of them was the San Francisco, where it won a bronze, and it came back and it was like, so much apple flavor. It's amazing. They emailed us and was like, you totally deserve this. And they were so excited about it. And then the other one, which shall remain nameless because we didn't win anything. They didn't give us anything, and the reviews came back and it was like hardly any apple flavor. And I'm like, how the fuck does this work? Like, how do these people running this gigantic international spirits competition that's supposed to be like the Mecca tell us, oh, it's amazing, you can taste so much apple, and they note all of these, and then this other competition that's also an international competition was like, so it's so subjective. It's like the TTB.
Right.
I don't know.
I was gonna say, and like you're saying, like you get a judge and they're looking for something that is kind of more in their flavor profile.
Right.
So like you could have 5 people on the panel and be like anywhere between like 2 and 5 stars, or something like that. Like, I don't like this. I think this is fucking delicious. And you're like, in between of what's going on.
I'm going to let you guys talk for
1 second. I got to check on one thing upstairs. I will be right back. I'm really sorry. I heard some child, I think, get up. So I'll be back in like 2 minutes. I'm just going to drop out. You guys talk for a second. I'll be back in literally like two minutes. Okay. Sorry about this.
But go ahead, Alan.
I will. You also have the dickwad distillers that get on these tasting panels that know their own profile, and they end up on the panel that's judging their own spirit, and that I'm not okay with that. There's a couple people that are very well known for that. I don't have any respect for that whatsoever.
We love the SIP awards and things that are consumer based. We always love to hear reviews. We don't want people to, shine sunshine up our ass. We want to know what you don't like about it. We want to know, what turns you off. We recently got a great review from, I don't know, Kevin Loves Bourbon, I think is what it is, or Kevin Loves Whiskey. I don't know.
Yeah, Kevin Loves Whiskey, yeah.
Yeah, he just from top to bottom, and he said that there were parts of the label that he didn't like, and I love hearing all of that stuff. I want to know, what don't you like, what do you like, and then there's the other flip side of that coin where I don't really give a shit what you think. We're going to put out a great spirit, we're going to market it how we do, and that's what we're doing. So
I like the ones that try to be dicks, like, but they won't commit. You know what I mean? Like, you can tell they're trying to say something really shitty, but they don't go completely in. Right. Like, I would rather you just write me some hate mail and at least give me some inspiration. Because I've said this about the industry in the past. Sometimes it's just as much about pissing off the right people as it is making the right people happy. If you're doing something out of the box that you have say one critic who doesn't like it, and it may not be that they don't even like the actual alcohol itself, they actually like it, they just don't like whatever you're doing with the label or whatever you stand for, whatever, they will mouth off about it so much and get people so interested in it that people will go buy a bottle just to see. And that works to our advantage sometimes. I'm good at pissing people off and not necessarily meaning to, and that's worked out. Somehow that's worked out for me. I can't promise it always will, but it has so far.
We're real people. We're real people making real products, and we try not to.
You're not a real people. You're a ginger.
You know what?
Sorry. If you saw our Iron Root reviews, we kind of played off the whole ginger aspect. I think we all got wigs because we didn't think it was fair to not have a ginger on the stream when we were reviewing.
Our company is full of gingers.
If you keep pushing her buttons, you'll see a ginger snap.
God, Alan, that was just original and hilarious.
I thought it was. made me laugh.
Yeah, but that's part of not being in Kentucky, right? That's our hashtag Beyond Kentucky. We don't have to play that game. We don't have to, if we want to say something, we say it. We don't belong to any type of guild, or we don't have to be on any type of specific trail that tells us we can't say this or we can't say that. And again,
Southern Indiana is its own state.
Yeah. I mean, we kind of do what we want. We're real people, and so people expect to have this big polished marketing campaign, and I appreciate that, because I do love the package of the bottle and the labels and all of that. But beyond that, are real people working a lot of hours to bring you this line of spirits. So Alan will be a ranting fool sometimes, and that's who we are.
I think you did very good, because I mean, the one day when you did that tour, you guys allowed me to post. You went like an hour and a half straight, Alan. It was fantastic. Like it was like I told someone, like, it's a masterclass in Indiana distilling history and just distilling in general. I'm like, there's 2 or 3 things going on. I'm like, it was great.
I tell my husband that literally 80% of my life is listening to Alan talk. Because I listen, I have to listen. I don't have to listen, but I do listen to, like his Facebook lives, and then his
You're vetting them.
and this and that. Yeah. I'm like, is there anything we need to apologize for in this? Like,
well, that's 80% of our live stream is usually listening to Patrick ramble on. Hence the Rambler.
And sometimes then there's a rant, and I'm just like, fuck yeah, what he said.
Right.
So you're also the legal department as well.
Right. Whoa. No.
Yes. Well, if you don't like what I say, you can write to Jolee Kasprzak at.
I got a guy though, so I can run it past him, right?
I would seriously, everybody that's still in the chat, people watching that are going to see this, you've mentioned it a few times already, Alan, but your blog that you've written, Robert Licorice turned me onto that probably a few months back, and I've been slowly reading and working through it, and freaking love it, man.
Thank you.
That's anybody that wants to really nerd out on whiskey and distilling and all, man, that's a resource for real.
I appreciate that. There's more coming. I haven't written as much on there here lately, but there's more coming. I did a distillation book that was involved in that a couple years ago, and I'm working on the second part of that. And then I've got a bunch of stories in the queue, and there's a documentary in the works about Indiana distilling and all that stuff, about the historic Indiana distilling and all that stuff. So eventually I'll get caught back up on all that. And I'm sure at some point in time, some whiskey writer somewhere who thinks he knows more than he actually does will write another article that pisses me off enough to get into some kind of technical detail, like the sour mash versus sweet mash, or column still versus pot still thing. So it's usually what it takes. Like I'll not be in the mood to write, and then I'll read something, and I'll be like, I'm gonna fucking watch this shit.
I disagree completely. Watch what happens.
Right. And I'm also the dick that'll like email it to the person who wrote the original article, or I'll be fucking sending Dan Schofield from Distillery Trail like my article, like, please post this, Dan. Please post this immediately.
Shots
and
fired.
I don't do it like out of an attention thing or anything. It's that I think, again, I probably have a problem. I'm so into what I do that like I can't forgive stupidity. I can't forgive people writing or thinking authoritatively without actually having the facts, because you can't know what you don't know. And that doesn't mean that I'm always right. I've certainly fucked up and said things that weren't exactly the truth too. But
I think the way you started distilling was working out the things that didn't work, knowing it. So when you do know what's going on, you're like, bullshit. And I'm not bullshit from a mean standpoint of view, but more like, this is education, and instead of you having to learn 6 things, just jump to the knowledge I have.
Yeah,
so,
and it's one thing to hear somebody that's like, they've got book knowledge on something, they're educated, so to speak, but somebody who's lived that out, who's worked that shit out, and they know it because they freaking lived it.
Mhm.
To hear them talking, to hear them share about it, it's a whole different ballgame, and that's what I'm hearing from you, basically.
That pretty much hits the nail on the head. I'm also probably a lot like if Sam Kennison was a distiller who also wrote. You know.
Sorry.
Oh my God.
I like Sam Kennison.
Right?
I do.
Yeah, Sam Kinnison's awesome.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Preacher turned comedian. It's amazing.
But
He's also dead. Just throwing that out there.
Listen, you know who lives forever? Assholes, Jolee. Assholes live forever.
You're gonna live to be 150, my friend.
Probably.
But we're coming up at an hour 45, and I don't want to keep you guys any longer than that. If you, like I said, we respect people and the lives that you guys have, and we could not appreciate you guys coming on more and having a good time with us tonight.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you.
And we appreciate you letting us speak openly and honestly, because that's when
be ourselves.
Well,
that's when we're at our best. So
you could have made it to that 5-minute mark, Alan. Just
I know.
There's no way. There's no way. I mean, I inside my head, I was like, this is never gonna happen. But
I have a hard time when I see the clock in the corner where it's like I look up and I'm like, oh, that was 4 minutes. This video is not getting touched.
right. But for whatever it's worth, we will share the hell out of it ourselves as well, just to make sure.
No.
I
think it'll do fantastic. So I'm not concerned about that. But we, like I said, we appreciate you coming on. Like the wealth of knowledge you two just put out in a nice, relaxed, fun way, which is kind of what we're trying to do. Where you're just having a conversation like you would have at the distillery.
Yeah,
it's kind of what we're aiming for.
It's just whiskey. Drink it.
Exactly.
It's not. We're not curing cancer or anything.
Drink whiskey, talk shit.
Can that be the new hashtag? I like that.
I think it's already a hashtag. I didn't come up with that.
Well, this is a night of giving other people. I'll give you credit for it. That's the first I heard of it.
Sweet,
so you're in with that.
Me and Larry Bird.
That's what I was going to say. Like, and Alan drinking with Larry Bird. That's an incredible story. I
there you
love
go.
it.
And Johnny Cougar. Don't forget Johnny Cougar.
That's right. Johnny Cougar was there too.
Yeah,
so many pasty kneecaps in all one place.
Do you know if I ever fucking meet John Mellencamp, he's probably gonna punch me in the face because I somehow feel like somebody's gonna have been like, this fucking Alan Bishop that distills at Spence French Lick. Every time he's on a show, he says Johnny fucking Cougar. So eventually that's going to get back to him. He's going to come looking for me.
I would prefer that to him, like just shaking your hand.
Listen, I will tell you right now, I will let Johnny Cougar
punch you in the face. I would be like,
I will let that motherfucker punch me in the face in a heartbeat because it will sell bottles. I'd be like, who got? I don't care if I go down like a sack of shit. I'm gonna be like, guess who got punched in the fucking face by Johnny Cougar? This fucking guy.
It'd be like the Jim Rome edition where Jim Everett comes over across the table and throws it.
Right.
I'm gonna post my daily updates of your black eye. Day 7.
Guess how you become the signature bourbon on Johnny Cougar's next fucking tour. You get punched in the fucking face by John Mellencamp, and you pretty much get what you want. There was joke in there about an ex-wife, but I won't go there. Not my ex-wife, but
we'll be awaiting the pictures of the black eye. Just
it's coming.
Daily updates.
I'm just gonna get up and be like, "Fucking, that was worth it. It was worth it."
I'm just gonna have Kim punch you in the face and tell people that John Mellencamp did it.
You gotta be at least when he's in town. Like, you gotta do it over the same weekend he's around.
He's around. We saw him
he's always
at
around.
a gas station. He's around. He's here.
Yeah, he's around.
It happened at the Speedway. He got fucking punched in the face.
I did see fucking Captain Kirk at the gas station in French Lick. That's no shit. I saw him out of the corner of my eye, and my brain did that thing like, "Hey, was that Captain Cook? Hey, what Captain Cook?" And then I didn't want to say anything when I was in the gas station because I don't want to bother him. But I went outside and I stood and he comes walking out and I'm like, "Are you?" And he's like, "Yep." And then he talked to me for a minute. I'm like, this is the most surreal fucking thing that's ever happened.
That's
awesome.
amazing.
Well, to everyone in the chat, thank you for stopping in and sticking on for so long. We appreciate you and all the questions you guys brought this evening. That's great. Thanks to the chat. Thank you, Jolee and Alan. It was a fantastic night. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Oh, wait, I forgot. Yeah, I'm doing this, and I forgot to have the outro ready. See, that's what happens when you've had a few drinks. So
Go to spiritsoffrenchlick.com.
That's right. Oh, and if you are looking, I know that Alan is on Distillers Talk with Royce Neely on the ABV Network. You guys have a show on there. Check that out. Really neat stuff going on there. You're bringing on other distillers. Definitely something to take a look at. So if you get a chance, please hop over there and take a look. But from our den to yours, remember, it's not the size of the den that matters. It's the love of whiskey. Cheers, everyone out there.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Get into it. 1, 2, 3.